Okay. So, um, sorry again for the technical difficulties we had, and we needed a last minute scram to get another Zoom code for everybody. But welcome. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that? And can you all see this? See my screen?
Yeah, we got it. We see it.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the career series on the legal profession. It's part 4. And today we have 3 different experts to speak about their journey. But before we go introduce them, I would like to go over a few slides. So I compiled a list of the best law schools for 2023, 2024. And if you just take a look, if there's any in-state or out-of-state costs, that basically means, like, for example, University of Virginia, if you're local in-state living there, that's their cost. And if you've come from out of state to go to their school, this is the cost. Okay, and on the bottom, I have the source of where I got this information from. What are the areas of law that we can practice? Okay, so then you take a look at the slide. There's a whole bunch of different areas. Or our speakers can probably touch upon if there was others that I have not mentioned on this slide that can be practiced. And how do we become a lawyer? Now, from state to state, I think there's different requirements on how to become a lawyer. But in California, usually you have to obtain an undergraduate degree, and that could be usually in any of the different practices, studies. Doesn't have to necessarily be law related, I think. And then you have to pass the LSAT. Go to get into law school, and then there's a baby bar exam, which is taken in the first year of your law school. Pass the MPRE, submit a moral character application, and consider a Master of Law degree. And then after you pass the California bar exam, you can practice law and then continue to complete minimum continuing legal education requirements. Okay, and the different exams I mentioned, the LSAT is called the Law School Admission Test. And actually, I think the new information on that is that beginning fall of 2025, the students who are applying for law school can opt to not take the LSAT when they're applying for law school, because the American Bar Association is thinking about getting rid of the mandatory requirement for getting into law school. And baby bar exam, I just mentioned, first year law students take that. The MPRE is multi-state professional responsibility exam, and that's if you want to practice law. So you need to take that, and then the bar exam. Okay. People to ask at Irvington, if you have information, if you want to ask about getting how to go about getting transcripts or any questions about classes, these are the high school counselors that you can try to contact. The college specialist at Irvington is Binda Chopla, and she is the person that you can email to ask, or your student ask about, oh, if I want to go to law school, what should I, where should I apply? Or what should I start looking for? And I think there's also some parent asked me about the 3+3 law program. So I'll also ask speakers about that. Get to the Q&A part. Let me introduce our wonderful speakers for tonight. They're not going to be talking in any particular order that I have on the slide. Okay, this is just to let you know where the background come from. So we have Mohsin Mirza, and excuse me if I pronounced it wrong. He is currently a law clerk for the Honorable Angel Kelly in the District Court of Massachusetts. He got a BA in Sociology and Black Studies from UC Santa Barbara, his JD from UC Berkeley School of Law, and he's worked in different areas of law over the past 7 years in different cities. And he can go into more detail about where he worked and what kind of law area he practiced. We have Brian Lee. He is an independent lawyer representing foreign clients and their U.S. subsidiaries in business in the U.S. He's got a BA from UCLA, a JD from UC Hastings, and he worked in corporate restructuring bank for over 10 years at Winston and Strong. And he can give more information too about his journey, any things that he's encountered. And then we have Tiffany Lowe, who is associate at Paul Weiss in their New York office. She has a BA in political science and rhetoric from UC Berkeley, a JD from Stanford Law School. She's worked in law areas of immigration, defense, appeal, wildfire prevention, litigation, investigation, and she graduated from Irvington. So definitely maybe have a lot to share about her experience from getting into knowing that she wants to get into law. Okay. So we will now open the floor for speakers. So either any of you can please decide what, like Brian or Tiffany or Mohsin, whoever wants to go first.
How about ladies first? So why don't we have Tiffany go first?
Okay, Tiffany,
Thank you.
want to go first?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I did this last year and it was really fun. So I'm glad I am invited back. That went well last time and I'm looking forward to sharing more. So I think I'll just start with maybe a brief overview and I'll let you all ask the questions and Youngpei, sorry, I'll just share some information. So I'll just try to add to that. And I think the best way to do that is to talk about what I'm doing now, maybe some of the areas I've worked on in law school or as an intern, and, practice as a lawyer kind of evolves across your career and there are so many options out there. So I think, it sounds like across the three of us, we already have a plethora of experience. So I'd like to share some of what I'm doing now. And it was mentioned earlier that I'm an associate at Paul Weiss. And to put that in context, these words may sound very foreign to you, and they certainly did to me when I was figuring out all the options. An associate just means you're a lawyer, a junior lawyer. There are certainly levels to this. I'm a second year associate, so I'm quite early in my career. And as associates, you support the partners of a law firm in their work. So I work both with large and small teams, but especially at our firm, we have larger teams where we're assisting our clients with a range of commercial issues. So Paul Weiss is a large commercial firm, and we do a lot of commercial work, and that also is very broad. That includes anything from just advising our clients about what they should do about a law that might be being discussed, or regulations or uncertainty in the landscape, in the news, in the headlines that you read about. That's a lot of our work. And as a litigator myself, I deal with litigations that either our clients bring or are brought against us. And so that's kind of the bread and butter you hear about what lawyers do, being in court, drafting papers. But there's also the not so sexy side about that, which is you have to go through documents, write up objections, and fight with the other side about what should get in front of the judge and what is right and relevant to the litigation. So there's a lot of work in just understanding the facts of the case, which deals with a lot of documents, and also the background work to seeing if you can even get into trial and being in front of the court. A lot of times things do settle. So that's another big piece of my work. And that involves a lot of different matters like employment, securities, which I think was on the slide. That concerns stocks usually and different equities. I've also done antitrust work, which deals with competition law and making sure that companies don't monopolize markets, and in so doing, hurt the consumers, right? With being able to control prices and, control the products that are in the market and prevent new competitors, which is what I found to be really interesting. There are run-of-the-mill contract issues, right? When someone says you violated our deal, that happens a lot. And I know, Brian, you worked in restructuring and bankruptcy for many years, and I am actually on quite a few bankruptcy matters at the moment, and I'm actually preparing for a trial in bankruptcy. So I'm we're heads down working on that now. So there's a lot that, I mean, every firm is different, but in my few short years of practice, I've been able to touch a lot of areas, and that's been intentional on my part, and is certainly something that is accessible to you if you're like me and you want to practice law, but you're not quite sure about what specific area you want to go into, or you're open to trying different things. And for me, I found that to be really rewarding. So I would encourage you to think about that. And if, even in your journey of figuring out whether you want to become a lawyer, there are a lot of areas to try. So you can certainly intern at a firm. I know that there are high school students and certainly college level students that can get opportunities at a law firm to do the type of work similar to the type of work. There's no one playbook that I described in a law firm. There's also the courts. I was a judicial intern during college for the criminal court in San Jose, which is really fun. There are also smaller law firms and solo practitioners. I also worked for a solo practitioner in immigration and personal injury when I was in college, or I should say after college. I took a year between that and law school. And then, of course, clinics during law school, other intern opportunities that I can certainly speak more to if anyone's interested. But I just I think the takeaway here is, it's hard, like it's a personal decision, right? Whether you want to go into the legal profession, it certainly has its share of issues. And we can certainly talk about that if anyone is interested. Just learning about the pros and cons, right? I think it's important to be transparent, but I found it to be really rewarding, and I'd love to answer any questions.
Emotion, you want to go next? I mean, because you have a different experience as a law clerk.
Happy to go next. Thanks for kicking
Thank you,
us off.
Tiffany.
I guess I'll just give an overview of the work I've done. So after, or just a quick review of like my career so far. So after Irvington, class of 2012, I was at UC Santa Barbara, became really interested. And even before then, I was interested in some of the big constitutional questions that were facing our country. This was the post 9/11 era. This was the time when questions about surveillance and civil rights were very much at the forefront of the issues facing America. And so that sparked my interest in law. And I, was as involved as I could be in undergrad. I had the wonderful opportunity to go to a place called the Asian Law Caucus in San Francisco. That's an Asian American civil rights organization. I did voting rights work there for 2 years. It was the first time I was around attorneys, and I really learned so much from them. And it was a really great to see the kind of difference lawyers can make, how interesting some of these cases can be, some of the downsides also of pursuing a career in law and public interest law in particular. So after that, I managed to get into Berkeley. I'm happy to talk about the journey of getting into law school and things like that. I had a wonderful experience at Berkeley, interned at the California Attorney General's office and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Generally have gravitated towards litigation work, and I've gravitated towards the public sector, see myself working in government in the future or at a nonprofit like the ACLU. Last year, I was at a place called the Reporters Committee, where I worked on First Amendment cases related to freedom of the press. And for the past year now, I've been in Boston, so coming to you from the East Coast. And I work as a judicial law clerk. And what that means is everything that comes through the courthouse doors that my judge has to handle, criminal matters, civil cases, I am really at the forefront of, or we as a team look at everything together. I'll take the first look at the papers that have been filed, the different motions, and try and come up with what the right answers are. And then along with the judge I work for, we work through the questions we have. We might schedule arguments and I help prepare her for when different parties come in. And then I work to assist in the drafting of the decisions that the court ultimately releases. So it's a really great opportunity. It's something that you all that is probably much further away in your sites and things, but there's a lot of great careers in the judiciary. There's people who are permanently law clerks. And for me, this is the time, and for many law students, it's something, particularly those who are interested in civil litigation. Civil litigation being when two different parties are suing each other either for money or for other types of relief or like to get the court to do something. So it's separate from the criminal context. But if you're interested in that, it's a really wonderful way to gain a lot of experience in a short amount of time. So I'll be there for a few more months. Still TBD as to, or to be determined as to what's to follow, and happy to answer any questions either about my prior experience, my current experience at the courthouse. Have had a fair amount of exposure to the criminal side of things in my current role, but otherwise have not had as much. So looking forward to speaking with you all. And Brian, looking forward to hearing from you as well.
Thank you. As Yongpei mentioned, I work as a solo practitioner. I have a niche practice. I represent mostly clients, foreign clients with operations in the US. So most of my clients are from Taiwan, for example. And I also have some clients out of Africa, believe it or not. I advise them on corporate, sort of commercial law transactional matters, mainly with dealing with manufacturing, licensing, distribution, financing, joint venture, etc. Before I started my own practice, I worked at a boutique firm called Murphy Sheneman, which was then acquired by a firm called Winston & Strong in San Francisco, where I specialize in corporate restructuring. That was many years ago. And sort of the center of practice shifted away. I mean, it used to be that you would have, like, San Francisco would be sort of a, have their own bankruptcy cases. And what I noticed is that, as I became a senior lawyer, the practice, the center of the practice was shifting to New York, Southern District of New York, and to Delaware. And so that part was sort of a reason why I wanted to change course a little bit. Also, I noticed that as you become an older lawyer, you're expected to attract and try to bring in some business. But I realized that also at the time that the type of clients I could attract tend to be small to medium-sized business, which could not afford my then billing rate at Winston & Strong. So and plus when my daughter was born, I really wanted to shift focus. So I decided to open my own practice, and then I had some client contact I brought with me, and then I was able to keep my practice till now. At this point, I guess Yongpei knows I'm almost semi-retired. I still practice law, but is not as intense as it was. So having been through the journey from a small boutique firm to a large law firm to then a solo practice, I think I can sort of give you some perspective about this legal journey if you want to know more. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, all the speakers. You guys are like real pretty quick today. We can move on to Q&A. So then we have everybody have a chance to have a talk. And to do that, I would like everybody to, if you have a question, to raise your hand. So then we know who I can call on. Or if you prefer, if you're shy, you don't want to talk, you could go onto the chat and type a message in there. And I think everybody has access to looking at it. So I know that our guests, Brian, Tiffany, and Mohsin, can answer the text as well. Does anybody have
I have a few
speakers?
from Ramya already, so maybe we can start with that while we wait.
Oh, okay.
Okay, these are good ones. So a question was about if you're interested in tech law, what high school students can do to learn more about it and to pursue it maybe eventually. It's a great question because it's such a hot topic right now. And I think, I tell people, if you really know, then you should get the practical experience. But if you don't know yet that you actually want to pursue law or a specific area, the best way to figure it out is to read about these issues, and especially with tech law, which is such an evolving area. I think, privacy, AI, IP, I mean, IP's been around, and still is it's not going away. Those are the ones that come to mind immediately, especially AI and privacy. Privacy has gotten more regulated over the years, especially in the US. The EU kind of started us off, and then California has I think they put it in place maybe in the 2018s or something when I was in college or law school, I forget which one. But all of these areas have very much evolving law, guidance, regulations. So I think the best way to learn about tech specifically is to just pay attention to the issues, whether it's, the big newsletters, or if you find a niche blog or some kind of publication. You don't have to read academic articles. I think just the more fun, maybe lay person issues is good here. And then especially if you see headlines about litigation or any government regulation or anything law adjacent, I think that's a great way to understand what lawyers are actually doing in this area. And my understanding is, I'm not a tech lawyer, but from my colleagues and my friends who are in the space, it is a lot of advising and less so in the courts, though some have reached that stage. And advising just means you're looking at what is out there, and you're just kind of like seeing what regulators are thinking, what politicians are thinking. And this is especially tricky because it's kind of tied to the election cycle, right? So even, in other areas, this happens to in immigration, for example. So I think that's a great way to kind of keep up with the issues and seeing what a lawyer might do. Sometimes they offer commentary in their, in the articles, or if you're so inclined, certainly reach out to lawyers who are actually practicing in the area or the specific issues that you might be interested in, and they'll give you a good sense of what's going on. So I think there might also be internships and opportunities out there. I think that's more specific and something you have to look for. But I think generally it's just good to keep yourself informed.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Uh, like Tiffany said, if you want to get into tech, I mean, usually people either have a STEM major in undergrad and try to get into sort of the patent track uh, of law practice, or I think, like Tiffany noted, privacy is a great technology issue. Something that will be around. It's an issue that will be around for a long time, I'm sure. So if you're interested in it, you should attend conferences, read a lot about the issue, and it's all over the newspaper really, and um, it's something that you can sort of get into and build a expertise before even law school.
Yeah, I totally echo everything my colleagues here are saying. The more you're reading, whether it's books or even following experts and professionals in these fields who will share articles and things like that. And like Tiffany said, it could just be things that are in the news. Often also there's podcasts nowadays too, law adjacent podcasts, or even just podcasts that touch on these issues. It doesn't have to be law related, but just as you develop your interest, inevitably there will be legal questions that come up, whether it's about technology or anything else. And so just pursuing your interest and building your own knowledge is always going to be helpful. If you have the opportunity to meet with somebody who's working in these professions, people very rarely turn on the opportunity to just chat with someone, take them out for coffee, something like that. So that'll also be something I think.
Yeah, I will also say that, sort of getting into finance, because a big part of, I guess, so-called tech practice is actually, VC corporate practice. And knowing some basic finance will help. Just so you can speak the language and, you understand what a cap table is, you understand, how these things work. It was foreign language to me when I started, and it was very difficult. So if you can get some experience before law school or before your first job, that would be great.
Okay, great answers, great advice. In the chat, somebody wrote down, what are the internship opportunities that students who want to become a lawyer, study law, that they can do in undergrad?
Let me just say, it's difficult to get into to get an internship before law school. I will say that, but again, I think you can. If let me rephrase. To be a good lawyer, I always feel like it's important to not only know the law, you have to understand the business. You have to understand the business to advise your clients. And so if you can get any business experience, assuming your potential clients in the future, your practice has to do with business, you really should, pursue it. So if you're undergrad, and like I mentioned earlier, if you're study business. Maybe get a internship, with a company and understand their operation. I think that will help you practice law in the future. Maybe if you have a STEM major, I think that will also help you get into patent law, for example, something like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And what I would say to you guys are high school students, but I would say this to college students. Don't worry so much about, you should figure it out if you want to go to law school, because it is a huge financial endeavor and will take 3 years of your life. But that aside, in terms of what you need to prepare for law school, law touches pretty much every facet of our life. We've talked about how even like the term tech can implicate business, startups, and startup is any business, and we'll have to deal with all the business issues, including if they acquired and then become a bigger company, right? And then of course the IP things that we hear about in the news, right, about copyrights and things going to the public domain, that kind of thing. All that to say is you can really do any major you would like in college and have any experience in college and still gain skills that would be helpful, that would translate into a great legal career. There are, of course, the skills that kind of come up over and over, and it would be great if you could practice that in college. And I'm thinking of writing, public speaking, critical thinking, problem solving. That really comes up in any undergrad study, and it just might be a matter of like, if you probably won't do as much writing in STEM as you would do in the humanities. So to answer the question, I totally agree with Brian that business is a great opportunity to learn what it means to run a business, and you'll often have either in-house lawyers or a compliance team that you can talk to either as part of your internship or just getting to know the company that will kind of inform what it means to know the intersection of law and business. And I did an internship at a company when I was in college, and that was very helpful, and especially touch on some privacy issues, which I was very glad to learn. And then in terms of like more legal opportunities, which certainly exist, and I think is definitely a good way, especially if you are quite certain that you want to go into law school and want to understand the intersection of law and life. There are judicial interns that I've mentioned that are available to college students. The work, you might not be working as much as you might as a judicial law clerk, for example, where you would actually draft the opinion for the judge and talk about the issues. But you'll get to observe and be in the court and be in the judge's chamber and talk to the judge about what they do, and they'll shed some light on what it means to act in that role. So that's an opportunity that I've personally experienced. And then there's also this program called Justice Corps, which I think is in San Francisco, Oakland, and then maybe Richmond, but it's all over the Bay Area. That allows law students to work in the self-help centers of courts. And what that means is there are certain litigants who cannot afford to hire lawyers, and so courts provide the center to help them with the forms that you need for dissolving a marriage, for figuring out child support with your spouse, for certain civil matters, what's called small claims court, where you can sue someone for a smaller claim. Maybe it's like a dispute over your lease or a theft of a small amount. So that was really cool. I really enjoyed it because you get to have one-on-one interactions with litigants, and they're not your clients, right? Because first of all, you're not a lawyer, and the court is it's more providing information. But through behind it and how it might apply to different situations. So that's something you might want to look into. It's called Justice Corps. It's one word. And that was really fun for me in college. And so there are certainly opportunities out there. I know Justice Corps is still going. I don't see any reason why courts aren't offering the same opportunities to college students, I should say. So yeah, I think there are plenty. It just kind of is up to you to look for them in the places that you think would complement your education and your interests.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a real question of getting a balance between getting some exposure and understanding. You can do that by meeting with attorneys, joining clubs and organizations that host talks with attorneys. You can occasionally intern at legal offices, and some of them will look for undergraduate interns. At the same time, the work you'll actually be doing will often be more administrative work, and all those things are really helpful and important and can lead to careers before law school too. At the same time, they're very different than the day-to-day work you might do as an attorney. So I think really focus on two things. First being exploring areas that you're interested in, regardless of what those issues or topics are. But just if you're passionate about different subjects, there will always be some type of legal component which down the line that knowledge can be helpful. Exploring different things. Oftentimes, when we're interviewing candidates at the judicial internship, we look at people who've had all kinds of life experience. It's very rare that someone's resume just says law, law, law the whole time. Oftentimes, they're bringing experiences from all types of work that they've done. And then the second is just, and of course, it's unfortunate that that there's so much pressure, particularly on grades and things like that. But if you're serious about law school, do your best to just focus on as successful as you can in the classroom. It can be a big adjustment. It can be challenging, but within 3 or 4 years, you'll have the time to improve if you're and get better and get used to things. And so just do your best to have your GPA as high as you can be, because for better or worse, it's such a massive determinant of the type of schools that you can get into. And ultimately, that is factored more in by law schools than is having a lot of relevant experience. So explore, talk to attorneys, join those types of groups, balance it out by pursuing other interests and building other types of knowledge, and then just do your best. Ultimately, college is academically focused, and just try your best to be academically successful.
Good advice. We have Linda wrote 2 questions in the chat. Her first one is, what is the hardest part of being a lawyer?
So we can go, maybe we'll go reverse order. The hardest part, I think the biggest challenge is getting the right work-life balance. Many legal environments are very demanding with the number of hours. Some of that is changing a little bit as people are more assertive of their needs and finding that balance. At the same time, there's a general expectation, particularly at law firms, but also in the nonprofit sector, that there's often a lot of working hours. It's not true across the board. I'm sure Brian and others who have done more work, particularly people who have worked in-house at different companies, have better work-life balance. Government jobs are known for having much better, but that's probably the biggest challenge. It can be intellectually challenging, and you can work through a lot of difficult questions and confusion, but oftentimes that's also one of the best parts of it. And as a result of that, I think that's like less of the hardest part. And then we can try to answer the second question too. The second question being, if English is your favorite subject, would becoming an attorney a good idea? I think it totally depends. Are you interested in law? Are you interested? A lot of it is, particularly in litigation, a lot of reading and writing. And if those are things that you really like doing, then it might be a good idea. If you're really more interested in literature and the legal questions are not as interesting, then it might not. It totally depends on every person.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Boshin said. I think the hardest part of being a lawyer is sort of the mental strain. The pressure comes from various sources. I think there's, in law school, you have to get your GPA up. I mean, that's what law firms really focus on. If you end up working for a large firm, there's immense pressure to clock a lot of hours. When I was at a large firm, I worked 12 to 14 hours a day for years, constantly. And there's also pressure to advance. I mean, to attract, opportunity to work with certain partners. There's competition within the firm itself, because I sort of saw myself, even when I worked for a large law firm, I sort of saw myself as a solo practitioner in that way, that I had to build my reputation so that I can attract opportunity to work with certain partners that I want to work with. And so there's internal competition as well. So, and there's also we're all Asian here. I guess, we come from a culture where confrontation is not necessarily, the thing that we do all the time. But in this profession, you had to be okay with negotiating, with disputing, with objecting, and that for me also was sort of a big transition. And you had to have certain level of some emotional detachment to your work to survive long term. Otherwise, you get burned out very easily. I think that's the toughest part of working as a lawyer. Oh, finally, of course, the time commitment. You're selling your time. I mean, your billable hour, you're selling your time, and it's only 24 hours a day. So that's probably the worst part of it. I mean, you just have to sell your time all the time. And if the second question, I agree with motion. I mean, if it's not necessarily, I mean, if you can read and write well, obviously you have the underlying skill to become a lawyer. But is that really what you're interested in? Because, analyzing literature and analyzing contracts are completely different.
I don't have much to add. I agree completely with everything that has been said. And I think mental strain is a really good way to describe the life of a lawyer. And what I mean by that from my perspective is really no day is the same. And even the same tasks are different just by way of the facts and what you have to do and maybe who the judge is. And there's just a lot of factors, right, that you're dealing with in any and every case or matter you're working on. And so, especially as a practicing lawyer, you are juggling a bunch of stuff. And so I think one of the challenges too is to be able to process a lot of information and be able to identify the parts that are most important, that are most persuasive, and maybe most relevant at that point, right? That can change over time too, depending on all the different factors I mentioned. And so I think that's something that every lawyer kind of has to grapple with, is to juggle the demands of the job and to kind of figure out what you need to keep in your brain at a certain moment, or what you file away in a properly organized inbox or storage system. So that's a lot of being an attorney too, with a very active docket.
Thank you, all three of you. We have another one in the chat. Prem asked, what part of being a lawyer differed most from what you expect?
You want to do this one first, Tiffany? Because you kind of were at the tail end last time.
Yeah, I can try. Nothing really comes to mind immediately, because I feel like I've had the privilege of seeing law in action before becoming a lawyer myself. And I'll just say here in law school, often what happens during your summers is you get to, if you're in a private firm, you do get to do a summer internship there. So you very much learn, although it's a different animal when you're actually full-time, how the firm works, like all the different matters you might be on, different people you may answer to, different teams, different lifestyles. And I think that also goes to the last question of just dealing with like everything and all of the demands of being a lawyer. So maybe I would say the difference maybe is when you're actually working full-time, it's quite different from any internship or volunteer experience, or even a summer experience at that very same firm. The time pressures are very real. Brian already mentioned we have long days, and in addition to that, especially in a big firm, it's very unpredictable. I think that's also, I mean, the time, if you know that you might be needed for this, 9 to 7 or beyond, whatever, maybe that's certainly better than not knowing when you're needed sometimes. And that happens very often, where the client wants something immediately, or the judge asks for something within 2 business days, and it has to be, or 3 business days, it has to be drafted, reviewed, sent to the client. There are all these steps, and sometimes just bureaucracy that holds things up and makes things a crunch. So that has, doing it like in real time is really different from just hearing about it, right? You think you can handle it. And a lot of people who want to become lawyers are type A and think that that they like work and they can work under pressure. And certainly, you have the capacity to, but it does take a toll on your mental and emotional health. So that's something to keep in mind, certainly. Of course, there are different legal jobs, and my understanding is government attorneys do have it in terms of like the unpredictability, have it better. Of course, if they're in trial or something, it can be equally demanding. So that's something to consider. When you get to the step of figuring out what specific role you want to be in. But I think just the nature of the lawyer's work can be quite taxing.
Legal profession.
Yeah, I think, the part that's sort of unexpected was how boring it could be in some way. I remember getting stuck as a young lawyer on due diligence project where I spent days and weeks and months reading emails after email after emails, and that was that was not glamorous. It's not what I expected. But you had to slog through that, and you had to do what you can, and with the advent of AI, I actually don't know if that kind of job still exists, but that's what I had to go through as a young lawyer.
Yeah, AI isn't really doing much for
Oh,
as I understand it now.
Good that we still have jobs. Good.
A lot of things are digitized. Like I think there's way less paper than before, but that also means we're very dependent on our computers, not so much software. It's a lot of manual review. Like from the litigation perspective, we have the equivalent of document review, and diligence is like you're reading the transaction documents to ensure that everything's good. So yeah, that happens in litigation too, and not very fun.
I'll give a couple answers to this. One is what surprised me most when I first became more familiar with law was how infrequent trials are. Trials are so much a part of how the public sees law. It's like the center of every legal movie is the big trial and the closing argument. I've been at the district court now for about a year, and I've seen one trial, and that was a wonderful experience, but it was only the one. Much more common is everything that leads up to it, and there's still a lot of great oral advocacy and writing and whatnot. So all the lawyering skills are not quite lost yet, but that is, I think, a surprise. But by the time you get to law school, you have a sort of an understanding of that. I think recently what's different most from what I expected or surprised me, I think, is often it's quite difficult to, and when there's both sides are staffed in a legal dispute with good lawyers, parsing the difference and figuring out who's actually on the right side is actually very difficult. And the way things ultimately wind up being decided, judges and law clerks, of course, do their best to get it right, but there's a lot that is very subjective. And in a lot of these legal doctrines too that currently exist, that currently govern how the country functions, are on much kind of thinner ground, I would say, than I think I realized before I started this journey. In that it's not like things are black and white. There's a lot of gray, and there's a lot of lawyering that's kind of created a whole system that is not as solid as maybe people think.
There was also a question about 3+3 law programs. So
I think
don't know
Irvine
what you guys
Law
have heard
School
about it.
does that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
would you?
I just responded.
What is
It
the
looks
pros
like
and
there
cons
are a
of
few.
students going into doing that versus the traditional way of just doing an undergrad in one area and then trying to apply to law school?
So I don't know anything about Buffalo. I know Irvine's a good school. Cornell's obviously a good school. If you want to pursue one of these programs and get right to practice. I'm sure there are a lot of positives. At the same time, from my experience, I think the goal should be, and there's people who have great careers who go to smaller, more regional schools and still do really interesting work. And at the same time, the better the school you can get into, the more options are open for you. So rather than thinking about how soon you can get finished, I think just try and think about like how high you can really achieve and what's the best you can do. If it means working for a little bit, I worked a little bit before law school, as I mentioned, and I think that really helped me focus on what I wanted to do. And I think it also helps once you're in front of employers, the fact that you've had some work experience. So that's my kind of take on that question. But everyone's life is different. It's really up to you and what you want to do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what's the hurry? Why finish your undergrad so quickly? If we're up to me, I mean, if I were advising my own daughter, I would tell her to take her time and decide for herself. Don't rush into law school. It's not something that you want to rush into. Yeah, getting that 1 year ahead is not gonna do anything for your career in the long run.
Yep, agreed. Nothing to add.
And I had a question for you guys. With the bar exam, how many? What if you can't pass it on the first time? Is there a waiting period you need to wait? And how many times are you allowed to take the bar exam?
I think you can take as many as you want. Back in my days, I think the California bar passage rate was 50% approximately. I don't know what is it right now, but there are some people who took it many times.
Listen, these bar exams are hard. California, I think also New York are the notoriously harder ones. I don't know the specific requirements, but I know from the employer perspective, if you don't pass, it's really not the end of the world. You can take it again and again, I think if needed. But I think, just as with any test, right? And you'll have plenty of test taking experience by the time you get there. It's just a lot about preparation. The bar exam is an animal though, so you need months for that.
Yeah, the bar out of every kind of step of my law school career, the LSAT, being in law school, studying for the bar, that was my least favorite part of the whole journey. It was challenging at the same time. And of course, some people have to take it multiple times. I think Michelle Obama and some others, people who are quite prominent, didn't pass on the first go. So it doesn't say anything about you as a person or as a potential attorney. At the same time, I really wouldn't think about it at the moment because it's so far away, and two, even in law school, I wasn't really thinking about it because once you're in law school, you're learning and you're kind of building that the steps on that journey. As soon as you finish, you have 2 months. Most people do a course, and I did that course. And if you follow it closely, the majority of those students at any law school in the country should be able to pass. So.
Thank you, guys. Does anybody else have any other questions for our speakers? If you have no other questions, before I end, let me just talk about what our next upcoming one will be. This is my contact information. If you guys have any other questions for our guest speakers today, you can go and shoot me an email and then I could forward to them. Especially if you're.
It looks like we have a hand up. Not sure if it's a question.
Yeah, I posted a question. We went to a different person. Just dumb question. Probably it's very odd to answer. What kind of a typical earning will be for a law practitioner in a firm for a beginner and a mid-senior level people? per annum.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. Can
So
you repeat your question?
What would be a typical earning and salary per annum for a beginner and a mid-senior?
Yeah, it really depends on what type of practice you're pursuing. I mean, large law firms, I actually don't know what the pay scale right now is, but I'm sure it's really high.
Right, we can talk
but-
money. I mean, this is just an idea, guys. Like, I don't think money should drive. I mean, they certainly do practically, right? But they shouldn't be the sole factor to drive your decisions. But it is starting at a big firm is $215,000 a year, which is very high. And then, you know, you can go up to, if you're like a general counsel at a company, you can make millions. And as partners, you also can make millions. And then, you know, in the public sector, especially, that pay could be reduced. And with government jobs, you're pegged to a pay scale. It very much depends on your years of experience. And in the corporate world, there's kind of, it's more variable, because it might depend on if you're at a company, if stock options, whatever it may be. Although I think there may be some ethical issues around that. Anyways, all of that to say is it just depends on where you're at, right? So it's really hard to say, and I wouldn't let that drive your decision of going into law. I mean, as a practical matter, of course, what kind of legal job you have and what kind of obligations you have.
Is it in the favorite box?
So I would say, you know, take a look at the data out there. This is changing all the time. And you know, as a solo practitioner too, the upside is, like an entrepreneur, it's very high. It could be very high. So
in general, profession, it's a passion driving that job. I think that applies to this form also. Right. Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
sorry,
Toby,
Brian, I cut you off, but I figured I'd jump in since I'm here.
More rough idea. Okay.
Any more questions?
I have one last question.
Okay.
What is the total number of years from the time you become an attorney and pass the bar exam? So I just want to know, like, the total numbers of years to become an attorney.
so usually 4 years of undergrad, and then law school is 3 years. So 7, give or take, however much you work in between. Well, goes by quicker than you think, though. And as far as the last question, salaries, public sector is always going to be less. You also work less. They're probably going to be half of what any big law firm is, if a little bit less than half. You know, all these jobs have their pros and cons. Many of those positions pay very well. They expect a lot. On the flip side, there are kind of mid-sized firms and smaller firms, and there are other places where people can kind of, depending on what you want to prioritize, I think there's a whole different world of make job there.
Yeah, if money is the reason why you want to get into the profession, you won't last very long, because the maintenance strain will be just too much. It's not worth it. So, I mean, it's nice to have the big salary, but you have to be able to, you have to enjoy the work to some extent to last a long time.
Got it. Yeah.
And any other questions? Okay, no. Let me just share screen. So that's my contact. If you have any more questions for our speakers or anything about law, please forward to me, and I will pass it on to our speakers, and they could perhaps answer it outside of this. And then we are also hosting, PTSA is hosting the next career series on engineering. I will have 3 engineers and 1 architect speaking for that one, and that's coming up on February 22nd. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for joining us today. A big thanks to Brian, Tiffany, and Motion for being patient with the technical difficulties, and also coming and sharing your journeys and experience advice, which was all enlightening. And I hope everybody has a good evening. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Yongpei. Bye, guys.
Thank you for having us.
For
Bye,
information.
everyone.